The Wedding Part 2 is the 25th and final episode of the second season of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Jeff Melman, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode and share some thoughts. I think I have fewer notes on this one than I did on Part 1. Part 1 was a pleasant surprise because I don't really care for flashback episodes. I've mentioned this before, I won't go on about it, but in general, don't like them. But Part 1 was actually really good. Part 2, the pacing wasn't great, but ultimately I was close to crying by the end of it because it was so beautiful. So I didn't love it all, but there were some really great moments. And as I said, spoilers. From now, it starts off with Ray and Debra meeting the priest. He asks Debra why she wants to marry Ray. He asks Ray why he would like to marry Debra, and Ray begins to overanalyze things a little bit too much. And when they're alone, he tells Debra that she doesn't really want him. She just wants the flowers and all of the other things that come with the wedding. And I feel like that's a genuine thought to an extent. But I feel like Ray is letting it get to him a little bit too much. I feel like constantly asking your partner, do you really want to marry me? Are you sure you love me? Are you sure it's not just this or that? It might actually get insulting. And we see this kind of reaction from Debra where she basically starts shouting at him, basically screaming that she loves him and that, my favourite line, if you've got cold feet, get some socks, which I absolutely loved. We then cut to the wedding, and I actually thought we'd have a little bit more time with the planning, and I think I would have preferred that. I don't know exactly what that would have looked like, but certainly the scene when Ray is on his own and then Marie comes in, and then Frank comes in, and then Robert comes in. It was so slow, and I didn't find any of it entertaining at all. It was a little bit relevant because Frank gives him a bottle of whiskey. I'm pretty sure it was whiskey, and this does become relevant in a little bit, and we'll come to that in a moment. Debra's parents then come in with a parcel that Debra has asked them to give to Ray, and it's a pair of socks, which I thought was actually really sweet and a really nice way for Debra to reach out to Ray on the wedding day and basically reinforce the fact that she wants to marry him. She doesn't have cold feet. She is here with him. And I thought that was really beautiful. We have a wonderful moment where they're in the church and Ray is down at the front and he sees Debra for the first time in her dress, and Ray's face in that moment is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. The pure happiness on his face was just fabulous. He then starts to act a little bit strangely. He ends up walking Debra down the aisle, and he's acting very over-enthusiastic in a way that's maybe charming, but certainly it's a very Ray response. I feel like he's responding to the anxiety. And actually, anxiety or not, the priest really admired the way he was behaving, and the priest said maybe that's the way everybody should behave when they're in love, and I thought it was rather adorable. It is strange because it's not a typical response, but if everybody behaved like that, it would actually be really rather sweet. And then we're having the toasts, and Frank makes a comment about how he's going to the bar to get cute because Debra thought the way Ray acted was cute. And now Debra begins to think that Ray was drunk. But instantly, I thought that makes no sense. She would have smelled it on his breath. She would have tasted it. I don't know how many times she's kissed him between then and now, but how could she suddenly... It was like a switch flipped and she just lost it. And not once did she stop to let Ray explain that he wasn't drunk. Frank made a comment and instantly went, oh, well, Ray must have been drunk. I'm not going to even consider any other alternative, despite the fact I've kissed him many times and I've been right next to him and I would have smelled the alcohol. So I don't love Debra in that moment. I don't think she was acting reasonably. I don't think it was a knee-jerk reaction. I just think it was a very unhelpful reaction. But then Ray said that was him. And there are two ways of looking at this. When Debra said, so that was you out there, part of me thought, okay, she's accepting the fact that was Ray, he wasn't drunk, that's great. But also, she now needs to accept the fact that that's just how Ray acts, regardless. He hasn't any alcohol, that's how he naturally acts, and now she has to put up with that for the rest of her life. Again, it is charming, but I can imagine that that kind of behaviour would get annoying if it was all of the time, because it's not typical behaviour. So I wasn't exactly sure how she felt when she said, "So that was you out there?" But I think it's a positive thing. Robert gives his speech, and we then end, well, actually, Ray and Debra kiss, and then it fades back to the present day, and we just see Ray and Debra swaying, dancing, and then we see the kids basically hanging off of them, clinging to them, and it was really beautiful, and I got really emotional. And while I'm exceptionally thankful that the show didn't end after 2 seasons, that would be absolutely horrendous, that would have been a really strong series finale, taking us right back to the beginning, and then at the very, very end, celebrating this wonderful family life they've created together. But, of course, thankfully, that isn't the end. We still have many more seasons to go. But it was really beautiful. So I'd say the first half of this episode, very, very slow. Not really that entertaining, to be honest, apart from the line about the socks, which I did like. But the second half, basically from the ceremony to the end, was just absolutely beautiful, and getting a little emotional thinking about it. Very well done, at least the second half. The first half, not so much, but it was worth it because the wedding part 2 ended up being a beautiful episode and a really wonderful end to a pretty fabulous second season.